This morning when I was drinking coffee, Darcy told me that she'd heard on the radio that 50,000 people were without power in Western Washington today. And then a little bit later this morning, I had a friend tell me that he heard there was a massive power outage in Pennsylvania. Well, that got me thinking. Back when I was a kid, if there was a storm rolling in and we knew there could be a power outage, the first thing we would do is fill the bathtub up with water. I don't know that anybody does that today, but they probably still do in those remote locations like where we were. But you would also go around and check the batteries in all your flashlights. You would stage your flashlights around the house. You wouldn't just put them all in one spot, because what if you got up in the middle of the night and it was dark? You needed to see your way around. You'd have a flashlight near your bed. You'd have a flashlight on the counter, one on the table. I mean, it sounds crazy, but that's what we did. We also got out any candles we had, the camp cook stove with the extra propane bottles. We'd make sure that the barbecue propane was ready to go. And we would do everything we could to prepare ourselves for that power outage, even if it was going to be a short one. You just never knew. Now, if they were going to be longer, 5 to 7 days, well, that could be an issue because we didn't have a generator, and we certainly didn't have any of the modern things we have today. But our power requirements were, I think, a little bit lower, too. We didn't have computers and cell phones and all those things, and our regular phone worked even in a power outage because it got its power from the central office. So power outages back then, they were different. We actually, as kids, thought they were kind of fun. It was like camping at home. But I think about the differences between then and now things are very, very different. Or they could be for you, even if they're not. Well, they certainly could be, because today we've got power stations. And if you know anything about power stations, you know that they can provide you regular 120 volt power, plus all your USB power to charge up phones and all those kind of things. And you can get decent sized power stations anywhere from 1,000 to 3,000 or 4,000 watt hours. So what does a power outage look like today? Well, the first thing I would say is that rather than filling up bathtubs and looking for flashlight batteries and all that kind of stuff, if I know there's a big storm coming and there's a chance of a power outage, well, I'm going to go around and plug in my power stations and make sure they're all charged up, which you should be doing about every 3 months anyway if you do unplug them. And two, because I know I can extend the battery life of my power stations with regular LiFePO 4 batteries, I'm going to put them on the charger. Make sure that all my batteries and power stations are powered up and ready to go. And because most power stations today that come out have essentially transfer switches. They've got pass-through voltage. So if you've got it plugged into utility power and you plug in, say, your freezers or your fridge and freezer to your power station, it's just going to draw off that 120 volt utility power until the outage happens. Once the outage happens, well, guess what? As long as you have your power station turned on and your inverter on your power station turned on, that's the little button to turn on your 120 volt, well, then it'll just take over, and your fridge and your freezer or whatever will continue to work off that power station. Now, in a previous video, I showed how you could take a 24 volt LiFePO 4 battery and plug it into a power station like the one I'm leaning on right now, which is my AFERY P210. So you've got a power station, and if you've watched that other video, you know you can extend your power station's usefulness by just adding another battery. But is that all you can do? Is it just one battery? You just plug one battery in and that's it? Well, no. You could plug 2 in, or 3, or 4. If your power station meets your needs, other than it doesn't have enough backup or reserve power in the battery because it only has 2,000 watt hours, well, why not add about 7,500 watt hours more to that power station? And that's what I'm going to do today. And I'm going to show you some different ways to connect power stations to batteries as well. And on top of that, I'm also going to show you that you can take one battery and power multiple power stations. And I know that might sound a little sketchy to some, but there's absolutely no reason why you couldn't do that. So we're going to do that right now. Let's get to it. All right, so I've got my trusty AFERY P210 here. I'm going to kind of move it a little bit because I need to make room. All right, I'm going to pull in this big guy, which is XCNY's newest battery offering, and this one here is an incredible 280 amp hours, which amounts to, well, let's have a look. 3,584 watt hours. That's a lot of power, but it's not even the biggest one yet. So first, we know from my past video that if I take this XT90 cable and I connect it to this battery, I can go ahead and plug it into my AFERY power station and it'll take 500 watts from this. So I can run this power station, run something off of it, and this battery is going to go ahead and keep that power station full until the battery dies, and we do that just by plugging it into the solar input. So we can do that, but before we do, I got another one right here. Now, first of all, I want to talk about these. These big batteries are pretty heavy. This battery must weigh 40 pounds. I don't know. I'm going to have to check. They're not light. That one's 3,584 watt hours. This one right here on the charger, folks, is 3,968 watt hours. 3,968, 3,584. That's more than 7,500 watt hours of power between these two batteries. But can we connect them together? Yeah, actually you can. Now, I wouldn't advise connecting these two batteries in series, though you can. The problem with connecting batteries of different capacity in series is one's going to drain before the other one. Doesn't really work very well. However, if you connect them in parallel, they'll actually work together. Now, you might argue that there could be some balancing issues, but we're not talking about a permanent setup here. What I'm showing you is what you can do in a case of emergency. Power's out, it could be out for days. You've got two batteries that are basically the same, but there's a little bit difference between the two in terms of the amount of watt hours or power reserve that they have. Well, you can connect these in parallel. Now, I've got this one on the charger. I'm going to disconnect it from the charger, and honestly, one of the things to consider with these batteries, and one of the reasons I say this is an emergency type situation, not a long-term solution, is that these batteries really need about 40 amps of charging to get them charged up in a reasonable amount of time. I'm only giving them 10 amps. So I'm giving this about 140 watts. And honestly, if it's down 2,000 watt hours or 1,600 watt hours, it's going to take an awful long time for this charger to get it charged back up. In fact, it took all night to get this one charged up, I think. So having a more powerful charger makes a lot of difference, and I do have some. This just happens to be the one that's sitting here right now. So we're going to go ahead and disconnect this guy here for now, because I don't have to have this battery fully charged to show you what I'm going to do. Now, I just happened to grab some cables that I had. They're kind of funny. Both have red ends on them. If you're going to do this, folks, be sure to pay attention to what you're doing. In order to parallel these batteries, which is just combining them so that the voltage stays the same, we get to add the amp hours together when we do this. So by connecting these up, negatives, don't short them out, negatives to negatives and positives to positives, we essentially turn this into a very big 12.8 volt battery. Now, these are already big batteries. By doing this, I'm making a 7,500 watt hour battery. Now, this is something that's really important when it comes to hooking up batteries in parallel that you're going to use this way. You don't want to take this cable and just put it on one battery and connect it up. Yes, that does sort of work, but then it's not really drawing off of these batteries the way it should. You've got positive to positive, negative to negative. That's a parallel setup. But the way you connect up this cable to these two batteries is one positive and one negative on opposite batteries. You still get 12 volts, but now you're going to be drawing off both batteries equally. So let's do that. And I could have done this when I first put this in, but you know. All right. Half of it's hooked up. Make sure that's snug. Come over to the other side. They do come with longer screws, so if you need to use the longer M8 screws, pretty much every battery manufacturer today sends them out with both. So I like that. That's a nice feature. All right, here we go. Tighten that one up a little bit more. Plug it in here. Right off the bat, we're pulling 107, 108 watts, but this does say that it's currently 100%, so it's not going to need to pull a lot of power. Let's go ahead and turn on the inverter. Let's take my light, which I've used before. All right, there we go. Now, we are sending 24 watts to my light. We're pulling 106 watts, I saw it jump to 111 off of these 2 batteries. Now obviously if I had a refrigerator and a freezer or something like that, it would be able to draw, in this case, 500 watts off these batteries continuously until they were dead. That means that I can extend the life of this power station considerably. But what if I needed to run a second power station? Could I do that? Sure, why not? Let's try it. All right, here we go. So I could take this XT60. Watch this, folks. Somebody asked me once if it was possible to charge 2 power stations at the same time. Now, ideally, you want these leads to go to 1 post on each battery. All right, let's see what happens when I go like this. Well, I see the light came on. So we are now pulling, when I checked here, 90 watts on this unit and about 80 watts over there. So there you go. I'm actually powering 2 power stations off these 2 batteries that are in parallel at the exact same time. Now this one, the cable that I'm running, I got some new cables coming in. This is not the best setup. Ideally, I would not use this kind of alligator clip type setup. It's really too small. These little guys here are way too small for the kind of power I was drawing. But it did serve a purpose for showing you something that you can do. Obviously, you want much bigger cables, folks. When XCNY came to me and offered me these 2 batteries, I got to be honest with you, I was really surprised to hear that they had come out with a 310 amp hour and a 280 amp hour 12.8 volt battery. This battery is almost 4,000 watt hours, and this one's over 3,500. That's over 7,500 watt hours total, which is more than 3/4 of the power that I have at my cabin that I can run my cabin on for days. So 2 of these batteries would be more than enough to run my cabin, quite frankly. That's kind of impressive, and it certainly would take up less room than the batteries I have there now. Now, these are 12 volt batteries, but all I'd have to do is run them in series. Of course, I wouldn't run these 2 in series because I would run 2 310 amp hour or 2 280 amp hour batteries in series, because I think it is best practice to run like for like in series. Same battery manufacturer with the same BMS, with the same amp hour and voltage rating is the best. Top them up all the way, make sure they're within half a volt, that's balancing them, and then plug them in and away you go. But you could use these in parallel if you were running a 12 volt system. Not too many people do anymore because frankly, you use a lot smaller conductors with 24 or 48 volt systems. But you could put 4 of these in series to get 48 volts, and then you could parallel some. In fact, XCNY, who've been in this business for over 15 years, even provides you with detailed instructions on how to parallel or put these batteries in series, how to use bus bars, all that kind of stuff. And they have a guarantee on these batteries. They have a 3-year free replacement on these. It's a 3-year warranty. They have lifetime tech support. And within 30 days of buying this battery, if you're not satisfied, they'll replace it for you or refund it. So that's pretty amazing. Now, these are grade A cells, so you should be able to get between 4,000 and 5,000 cycles at 100% depth of discharge. Now, these batteries actually have newer, better BMSs. And I have to be honest, anybody that's not putting in 200 amp BMSs today, I don't know. Maybe 100 amps is okay, but these bad boys have 200 amp BMSs with a 500 amp peak. That's incredible. That is an insane amount of power. The max load power coming out of these batteries is 2,560 watts. That's 200 amps. But you do have a 3 to 5 second 500 amp peak current that you can draw. And it's very, very short, but that means that they are going to be protected. They do have low temp charge protection and discharge protection built into the BMSs on them, which is very important with LiFePO4 batteries. They recommend a 40 amp charger with a charge current of 14.4 volts. And they have a 10 volt cutoff, so the BMS is going to shut down at 10 volts to protect the battery. So they've got all the standard protections built in, but a 200 amp BMS with 2,560 watts that you can draw off of either battery. So if you're running 2 of these batteries in parallel, 2 multiple power stations, they can handle the draw. That's amazing. Now they do recommend a 40 amp charger, but you can charge these with 100 amp chargers as well. But I do have some other options that I want to show you to supercharge your power station. Let me grab a couple of them. One of the things that I didn't mention in my video on charging batteries for your power station was the DC to DC chargers. I didn't actually have any at the time, so I couldn't show them to you, but now I got a couple. This one right here is a Redodo, or I think they're actually pronounced Redodio. This is a 40 amp DC to DC charger that is actually designed so that you can hook it up to your vehicle's battery directly off the alternator, and it can take 11.3 to 24 volts incoming off of that alternator charge directly at your car's battery or your truck battery. Then you run cables, which their book will tell you what size cables and everything else to run, and you run those cables to your LiFePO4 battery. But it also has a solar connection that can take up to 36 volts of solar as well. So you can plug one of these in to your solar panel, like on your RV or outside that you're going to charge your batteries up from, and one into your car, and you could use this to charge up your batteries. So by plugging this into your battery, plugging it into your car, you could run your car like a generator and get 40 amps of charging. Well, that's about 500 watts, folks. If you've dropped 1,000 watt hours off these batteries, well, 2 hours later, you could have them fully charged. The next one is a ComVolt, and this one's very similar. Input voltage of 12.5 to 36 volts with a max of 40 amps. Output voltage 14.4 volts, max 30 amps. You can plug this into your battery so that it gets charged direct from your alternator, and plug this into a power station. It's got an XT90 port, and you're going to get that 400 plus watts of charging off this as well. So now you've got a DC to DC charging option that you could run off of a vehicle. You can hook up your battery charger off of a vehicle with an inverter, or directly off of utility power if it's running, or a generator if that's running. But what about hooking it up to a power station and running it off a power station? Well, you could also do that. I think this is potentially a viable option for someone that doesn't have a better option. And it's not the best, because you're going to be converting DC voltage to AC voltage to DC voltage, and you're going to lose some efficiency there. But if you're in an emergency situation and you need to get this charged up, and you don't have an MPPT controller or any kind of charge controller to run a solar panel into your battery, well, what if you could run that solar panel directly into your power station and then run your power station to charge your batteries? Well, you could do that as long as the sun's shining, and so let's try that out. All right, there we go, folks. And we are currently running 80 watts through this from the power station into this battery to charge it up. Now, obviously, that's not ideal. However, let's think about this. If I was running 500 watts of solar into my AFERY power station, well, for the next 2 hours, I could easily run about 400 to 500 watts off of a battery charger from my power station into this battery. So if I only needed to put 1,000 watt hours back into this battery, I could do it in a couple hours with a big enough solar panel running to my AFERY power station. Obviously not the most ideal situation, but it's something that I'm not sure that everybody's considered. I'm currently only drawing 80 watts off of the power station to run this one, but that's not going to charge it up very well. You're talking 4,000 watt hours. If this battery's drained, I'm going to need 10 hours at a 400 watt charger to do that, and I don't have 10 hours of sun. But from an emergency standpoint, if it meant I didn't have to run a generator for 2 or 3 hours, I could absolutely run my charger off my power station with my solar panels hooked up. Now, obviously, I'd have to disconnect the battery from the power station in order to do this, because I'd have to run my solar panels into the power station. But again, we're not talking about an off-grid setup here where you're going to run your cabin this way. We're talking about emergencies only. The power went out. I mentioned earlier, 50,000 people woke up this morning in Western Washington without power, and apparently a bunch in Pennsylvania don't have power. So if that power outage was fairly extensive, could they use these options to get these batteries charged back up? Sure, they could. When the sun's out, you could put your solar into your power station and then run a charger for a couple hours. Once that's done, hook up that DC to DC charger in your car, charge it up the rest of the way, or run this off of a generator if you've got one. There's lots of different options for charging these up. The best option, in my opinion, is to get yourself a small charge controller, preferably bigger than this one. This one's only about 10 amps, I think. So 10 amps isn't very much. It's just like this charger. It's not going to produce much power. You're going to need something that puts out at least 1,000. And actually, if you're really trying to make sure that you can survive an extended outage with solar, then you're going to need more like 1,500 to 2,000 watts of solar. That's 3 or 4 solar panels nowadays. And that, in my opinion, is one of the best options. But I do think it's important to bear in mind that this is an emergency type situation. This isn't a permanent solution. Now, are these better than the proprietary extension batteries that you can get? Well, this guy here that's 4,000 watt hours isn't much more expensive than a 1,000 watt hour EcoFlow extending battery. Well, wait, I had to go check. I was wrong. This battery is not more expensive than an EcoFlow external extra battery, the 1024 watt hour battery. It's actually less expensive, folks, and 4,000 watt hours. I'm sorry, I'm going to get one of these instead of getting somebody's proprietary battery. Now, my final thoughts are, a question that I've seen popped up often is, how long can I run my? Well, I'm testing another power station right now that I'm actually quite impressed with, and I'll be bringing that to you soon. It's a 4,000 watt hour power station. That's the size of this one battery right here. And that power station ran both of my freezers. I have a smaller chest freezer and then an upright freezer as well. And with both of those running, at times running over 180 watts, after 12 hours of running those two freezers, both of which were opened and stuff put in to freeze, which means they're going to cycle up and take longer to freeze. After 12 hours of running, my battery was still well above the 50% mark. In fact, I know that I could run on 4,000 watt hours at least 24 hours, if not 36 to 48 hours, depending on how many times I opened up my freezers. Well, that's a lot, folks. So yes, you could absolutely take something like that AFERY power station, plug in your fridge and your freezer, and put these batteries to it and run all weekend long and longer. Obviously, for an extended outage, you've got to look very seriously at how you're going to get your batteries charged back up. But again, this is not an off-grid solution. This isn't how I'm going to power up my cabin. I'm a do-it-yourself solar guy. I'm going to put in solar panels and charge controllers and inverters and run that way, because I can do that and do that for less than the cost of a really, really big power station. But there's definitely some convenience to power stations. I have about 7 or 8 of them. And yes, I test them on my YouTube channel, so that's why I've got so many. But frankly, they're pretty nice. I can just throw a power station in the back of my Jeep when I head out into the woods, and it'll power my little refrigerator. Or I can take a power station and plug it into my freezers in my garage, keep those running in an outage, and put one in the house to run the fridge in the kitchen. And then, for that matter, still have something that I can charge phones up or run lights off of, etc. So power outages today, they're nothing like they were 50 years ago. Maybe you still put some water in the tub in case the pumps go out because there's no power for them, but you can charge up your rechargeable flashlights on power stations. You can hook up a solar panel to a power station and run all kinds of things. And with this kind of backup power, you're not going to run your big kitchen stove. Let's be serious now. That takes a lot of power. And you're not going to run a heat pump or an air conditioner. Not for very long anyway. I wouldn't even try it. But you can run lights. You can run computers and laptops. Keep your phones running. Charge up your flashlights. You could run a griddle. You could run your fridges and your freezers. You could run a coffee pot. You could run crock pots. So there's lots of options in power outages today. And I would suggest that you take a very, very serious look at big batteries like these new XCNYs. These are awesome batteries. I really like the XCNY products. They've got tons of reserve power. And man, you can supercharge your power station during an outage by just hooking up 2 of these in parallel and plugging it into your power station. Or hooking 2 of these in parallel and plugging them into 2 power stations. Well, that's all I've got for you today, folks. Check out XCNY online. I'll drop a link down below for you. And I'll drop another video right here for you to check out. Thanks for watching, folks. I hope you all have a great day. The old Jarhead out.